When the war brought the Lich King's banners north and the snows of Icecrown hid fresh graves, the citadel thrummed with a different kind of industry. Not the measured march of soldiers or the cold prayers of death priests, but the fevered experiments of a man who wanted to bend rot, plague, and bone into proofs of his intellect. Professor Putricide called it progress. Others, those who smelled rot in the hallways and heard the distant clink of hooks, called it blasphemy. Putricide's experiments fell into two shapes, those the public could not help but notice, festering giants that stumbled from his vats during fights, and those he kept carefully out of sight. For every abomination pushed into the open to test its gait and appetite, dozens of smaller things were sewn behind traps and iron doors. Unfinished lessons, spare parts, trophies. It is here, in a walled alcove beneath a lab table, that Stitchwork came to be. The construction of Stitchwork was not an act of artistry, but of economy. Bones taken from stale corpses, knuckle bones blackened from Putricide's baths, were wired to ribs, prized from corpses stacked two to a bin high. Muscle came from roasts of scavenged mercenaries, long since drained of blood and swaddled in glycerin. Sutures were copper thread fouled with bile. Where the hook entered the shoulder, the hides had been patched like a ragged coat. Putricide did not aim for beauty. He needed utility, and if an experiment scuttled across the flagstones, carrying a cleaver or a rumor of plague, so much the better. A misfortune hardened into the abomination. Among the patched hides and hanging clamps was the still recognizable shape of a woman, an adventurer, whose sigil and belt showed she had once stepped into a tavern light before fate drew her to the Icecrown wastes. The woman's eyes had been hollowed and replaced with glassed stones to better accept the necrotic energies Putricide favored. No one bothered to learn her name. In the lab she became a lesson, what a living thing costs. Stitchwork's first hours were private. Putricide watched from a wrought mirror, scribbling notes. The abomination lifted a hand, then a second. The first test drive failed when a seam along the abdomen split, spilling a guttering pool of viscera back into a basin. Putricide laughed, frustration and triumph braided together. Failure taught technique. Over the next cycles, he tried pattern and temper. A scrap of an old bone to steady the shoulder, a trimmed tendon to hold the jaw. He fed Stitchwork carefully, at first, with dead meat and fetid brine that smelled of mold and old gold. As the construct moved more deliberately, Putricide introduced stimuli, caged flies buzzing beneath an observation dome, the ringing of a bell, just like the one an executioner might use. When the creature snapped, it did so on command. When it reached, it did so with the uncanny coordination Putricide desired. Stitchwork never left the alcove. It was not meant to be a soldier in the grand host. It was a demonstration model, a private chimera for the professor's entertainment and self-education. Putricide took notes in a codex browned with rot, tendon alignment, plated sutures, the precise angle for a hook that would not unseat during a pull. The hook, curved, serrated, and stained the color of old winter wine, was anchored into the shoulder with an engineering of leather plates and wire. Putricide's marginalia shows his pride. A useful hook bends the spine just enough to coax the marrow out. But laboratories are never private forever. ICC was a mesh of centuries, but even the scourge had holes. An errant ghoul, a bored death knight wandering halls between orders, a courier who took a wrong turn. Such accidents were frequent. A footfall flushed into the alcove one night, a scavenger, a thief cloaked in the desperate bravery of the living. He entered as Putricide slept the small sleep his dreams afforded. The scavenger found Stitchwork, saw the gleam of the hook, and thought of coin and trophies. He took the bellows Putricide used for sealing sutures and laughed at his luck. Stitchwork did not sleep. The creature perceived scents and vibrations, and when the human reached for the bellows, something inside the stitched mass tightened. The thief tripped on a ruined clamp. The noise drew others. In a moment that was more luck than strategy, Stitchwork broke its bonds. Whether the profane combination of patchwork nerves and necromantic spark created a sliver of cognition, or whether the gargantuan instinct to lash out took the stage, Stitchwork became both predator and prisoner. The alcove filled with a confusion of movement. The thief's alarm screamed like a bird. Putricide's jars rattled as the abomination hooked and pulled. When the dust settled, there was a smear of blood on the floor, and the hollowed face of the adventurer, still a part of the monstrosity, turned toward the wall. Stitchwork, for reasons no necromancer could explain, did not wander away. It stayed, as if the stitched thing recognized the lab as its home, or as if some kernel of the adventurer's life, memory or stubborn hunger, bound it there. Putricide arrived to find the alcove in ruin, and the thief a rag at the far end of the corridor. He swore and scribbled a different set of notes: improved restraints, a better protocol for feeding, the need for more stable ligatures. But even in his ire there was method. If Stitchwork had demonstrated even the faintest hint of directed motion, then it had value, a prize perhaps for the right patron. Allied with a clever hand, it might be an enforcer on the inner passages of ICC. The professor resecured his experiment and, true to his nature, started making smaller copies of what he had learned. He waxed about the efficiency of a hook placement here, a tendon there, and he numbered plans in margins. But somewhere in his catalogues a line was crossed. Putricide's curiosity sometimes overrode cruelty, but only to learn. Those projects that grew teeth the hardest were those he used only in private. Stitchwork stayed in the alcove for years, forgotten when the Lich King's attention turned to other matters, and remembered only in scraps: a boot, a ledger page, a curving hook, until by the contrivance of a death knight, or the prying of an adventurer, the alcove's trapdoor opened and the world saw what Putricide had tried to hide.